Somebody help him! It's crushing his chest, he can't breathe!
The scream shattered the peaceful mountain air, turning a backyard birthday party into a living nightmare. Paper plates scattered. A little girl dropped her cupcake. Red and blue balloons drifted up into the cloudless Colorado sky as the guests stood frozen, watching the unimaginable unfold. Right there in the middle of the yard, a massive grizzly bear had tackled a man to the ground. Its claws were sunk deep into his back, pinning him like a rag doll. The bear's heavy frame heaved with rage, or maybe confusion, as it roared loud enough to shake the glass in the kitchen windows. The man underneath his white button-up shirt, neatly ironed just moments before, was now soaked in blood. He was gasping for air, trying to say something no one could understand. One hand reached up, not to push the bear away, but to touch its face like he was trying to calm it. Someone shouted, "Don't shoot, that's Bruno. That's his bear." But it was already too late. Before we go any further, if you love true animal stories that are intense, heartbreaking, and unforgettable, go ahead and hit that subscribe button to Animal Story. We tell real powerful stories where animals are heroes, and sometimes tragically the villains. Don't miss what comes next. To understand how we got here, how a beloved family moment ended in blood, you need to go back. Back before the screams, before the claws, before the birthday candles were even lit. Back to where this story really began. It started 3 years ago in the same backyard. But back then it was quiet. Just a man named Bryan Kessler, a 39-year-old woodcarver with rough hands, a kind face, and a heart still cracked from losing his father to a sudden stroke. Bryan was the kind of guy who kept to himself. He lived on the edge of a small town in northern Colorado, surrounded by forest mountains and not much else. He didn't go out much, didn't do social media. But everyone who knew him said the same thing: Bryan would give you the shirt off his back. After his dad passed, Bryan kind of disappeared from the local scene. No one really saw him around town. Some thought he moved. Others figured he just needed time. But the truth was far stranger and far more dangerous than anyone could have guessed. One late spring morning, Bryan found something in the woods behind his home. A small, shivering ball of fur, no bigger than a watermelon. It was a bear cub, alone, no mother in sight. Most people would have called wildlife rescue. Bryan didn't. Instead, he picked it up, carried it home in his flannel jacket, and fed it from a baby bottle. He named him Bruno. At first, it was like watching a Disney movie come to life. Bryan posted a few videos to Facebook just for friends, and overnight they went viral. A grown man bottle-feeding a bear cub, teaching it to high-five, letting it nap on his couch. The internet fell in love. But what the internet didn't see, what no one could have imagined, was how fast Bruno was growing, how strong he was becoming, or how much Bryan's love for him was turning into something dangerously blind. The bear became his whole world. He turned down job offers to stay home and care for Bruno full-time, built a custom pen behind his house, made Bruno his own birthday cake every year. It was sweet, it was strange, and it was about to turn deadly. Because no matter how much you love something, a bear is still a bear. Bryan Kessler wasn't a crazy man. If you'd met him at the local farmer's market, you might have mistaken him for a high school history teacher. He wore old Levi's steel toe boots and always had a flannel shirt on, sleeves rolled, collar frayed. His hair was peppered with early gray, and he had that kind of quiet voice you had to lean in to hear. He wasn't loud. He wasn't the look-at-me type, but he was kind. He made hand-carved wooden animals for the local church auction, helped his elderly neighbor split firewood every fall. When the animal shelter flooded one winter, he was the first to show up in the middle of the night, hauling sandbags and blankets. People trusted him. But Bryan had a sadness about him, something you couldn't quite name until he talked about his dad. They were close. His father, Harold Kessler, had been a firefighter for over 30 years, the kind of guy who could fix anything with duct tape and a pocket knife. When he died suddenly of a stroke, Bryan didn't cry at the funeral. He just stopped being around. Grief changes people. For Bryan, it pulled him away from the world. That is until he found Bruno. At first, Bruno was no bigger than a beagle, soft brown fur, wide glassy eyes, and clumsy paws that slipped on Bryan's wooden floor. Bryan fed him with a dropper and warmed his little body with hot water bottles wrapped in towels. They'd fall asleep together on the couch, Bruno curled into Bryan's chest like a newborn. Bryan would tell people, "He saved me as much as I saved him." He had always loved animals, rescued injured birds. As a kid, took in stray dogs, even tried to nurse a fox back to health once. But this was different. This was family. Most folks in town thought it was odd. A few thought it was plain stupid. "You can't raise a bear like a dog," the guy at the feed store said. "Does he even have a permit for that thing?" someone asked at the post office. But Bryan brushed it off. He wasn't breaking any laws, at least not at first. In Colorado, there's a gray area when it comes to orphaned wildlife on private property. As long as Bruno wasn't out roaming the streets, no one really stepped in. And if anyone doubted how gentle Bruno was, all Bryan had to do was show them a video. There were dozens. Bruno eating whipped cream from a spoon. Bruno lying on his back while Bryan rubbed his belly. Bruno sitting at the dinner table with a party hat on pawing at birthday candles. The internet couldn't get enough. Bryan's TikTok and Instagram accounts hit 200,000 followers within a year. He never monetized any of it. He didn't care about fame. For him, it was just a way to share the magic of Bruno with the world. But even in those early videos, if you look closely, there were moments. Times when Bruno flinched at sudden noises. Times when Bryan winced a little too hard when Bruno leaned on him. Moments when that soft, curious look in Bruno's eyes turned cold and unreadable. Still, Bryan never showed fear, never hesitation. If anything, he loved Bruno harder the bigger he got. By the time Bruno was 2.5, he weighed nearly 600 pounds. He had jaws strong enough to crush a bowling ball and paws the size of dinner plates. But Bryan kept insisting, "He's different. He knows me. I raised him since he was a baby. I trust him." Trust. That word came up a lot with Bryan. He trusted Bruno to never hurt him. He trusted that love was enough. But wildness doesn't vanish, it sleeps. And no matter how close they were, no matter how many times Bruno hugged Bryan on command, the truth was always there, crouched deep in the back of those amber eyes. He was still a bear. And Bryan, despite all the love in the world, was still made of skin, bone, and hope. In the small town of Eagle Ridge, they became somewhat of a legend. Have you seen the bear guy? Oh yeah, Bryan and Bruno. They're amazing. People whispered about them in coffee shops, grocery stores, and gas stations. Tourists even drove up the mountain hoping to catch a glimpse of the big grizzly, lying peacefully on Bryan Kessler's porch, paws tucked beneath him like a house cat. At first, it felt like a miracle. A man broken by grief finds healing in the unlikeliest of places inside the heart of a predator. Bryan often said Bruno wasn't just a bear, he was his purpose, something to live for, someone to care for. They ate breakfast together every morning, Bruno on a reinforced metal platform Bryan built with his own 2 hands. Scrambled eggs, blueberries, sometimes even bacon. Bryan swore Bruno had a soft spot for maple syrup and vanilla yogurt. In the evenings, Bryan would sit out back in a lawn chair, guitar in hand, strumming old country tunes as Bruno laid beside him, chewing on logs, or simply staring off into the trees. Sometimes Bryan would talk to him like a friend. Other times he'd just sit quietly and lean against Bruno's thick fur. "It's like leaning on the earth itself," he once told a local journalist. "He makes the world feel still." By year 3, Bruno had his own custom indoor enclosure attached to the house. Heated flooring, plexiglass walls, a security gate Bryan never actually locked. He said Bruno hated feeling confined, and he respected that. He trusted Bruno completely. Visitors were always struck by how gentle Bruno seemed. Despite being the size of a sofa, he never growled, never lunged. He'd sit patiently while Bryan brushed his fur. He even knew hand signals, stay back paw. Bryan taught him those the same way he might train a Labrador, with love, consistency, and the belief that animals respond best to kindness, not fear. And for a long time, it worked. In fact, it worked so well that Bryan decided to do something special. For his 42nd birthday, he planned a small gathering, close friends, some family, and a neighbor or two. He hadn't had people over in years. Most hadn't even seen Bruno in person. "He's big, yeah," Bryan said, "but he's a big baby, you'll see." He even joked in the invitation, "Come for cake, stay for the bear hugs." And people came. 15 or 20 of them gathered in the backyard on a sunny Saturday in April. There were folding chairs, a cooler of soda music playing from a Bluetooth speaker, and a table loaded with homemade pies, potato salad, and cupcakes decorated with tiny bear paw prints. Bryan wore a paper party hat someone made him put on. Bruno. He had a custom birthday collar, blue and yellow, with the words "Best Friend" embroidered in block letters. Kids asked to take photos. Adults stood back in awe. Bryan beamed. "This is my family," he said, resting a hand on Bruno's back. "I don't need anything else." But even in the middle of the laughter, there were signs. Bruno wasn't lying down like usual. He was pacing slowly but constantly. His ears twitched at every burst of laughter. His eyes kept scanning the crowd. Bryan noticed. He told a friend, "He's just excited. He's never had this many people around." But the friend Claire Davis, a vet tech who'd known Bryan for over a decade, wasn't convinced. "He's overstimulated," she whispered to her husband. "He's too big to be this tense." Still no one said anything, because Bryan looked so happy. And when he finally stood up to give a toast, holding a paper plate in one hand and scratching Bruno behind the ears with the other, everyone clapped. He looked around the backyard, voice cracking just slightly. "Thank you all for being here. After everything I've been through, Bruno gave me my life back. He's not just a bear, he's my best friend, my son, my everything." No one knew that just minutes later Bruno would snap. No one knew that this would be the last photo ever taken of Bryan alive, grinning in front of a cake, arms wrapped around a 600-pound grizzly. And no one knew that the moment would be remembered not as the sweetest part of the day, but as the last calm before the storm. In every tragedy, there's always that moment, the one that haunts everyone afterward. The if-only moment. If only someone had spoken up louder. If only Bryan had listened. If only love was enough. In the weeks leading up to his birthday party, Bruno had started changing. Not in a sudden, dramatic way, but in small, quiet shifts that only someone close might have noticed. And Bryan, well, he noticed. He just didn't believe it. Bruno had grown restless. He no longer enjoyed belly rubs the way he used to. Sometimes he flinched when Bryan touched his face. Other times, he'd pull away, completely choosing to sit alone in the corner of his enclosure, watching, waiting, staring into the trees like he was hearing something no one else could. Bryan chalked it up to growing pains, hormones, maybe the weather. "He's a little moody," he told a friend, with a laugh. So was I at 20 years old. But Bruno wasn't 20. He wasn't even human. He was a 3-year-old male grizzly, an apex predator, now entering full maturity. And wild animals don't just get moody, they get unpredictable. The first real scare came when Bryan was cleaning Bruno's enclosure. It was a Sunday morning, and like always, he let Bruno roam the yard while he scrubbed down the water trough and restocked the feed bin. Out of nowhere, Bruno charged. Not fast, not aggressive, but fast enough to knock Bryan off his feet and pin him to the ground with one massive paw. Bryan tried to laugh it off, said it was a playful pounce, but when he stood up, he was shaking. He had a bruise on his chest the size of a dinner plate. Later that night, Bryan texted a friend. "He scared me today. First time ever. But maybe I needed it. A reminder that he's still wild." That same friend, Claire Davis, the vet tech from the party, called him immediately. "You need to get him evaluated. I know you love him, Bri, but this isn't safe." Bryan didn't argue, but he didn't act either. A few days before the party, a wildlife expert from Boulder County, someone Bryan had followed on YouTube, reached out after seeing one of his videos. She was kind, professional, and deeply concerned. "You're in dangerous territory, Bryan. That bear's behavior is textbook escalation. You need to get help managing him or rehome him entirely. This isn't going to end the way you hope." Bryan thanked her for her time. He promised to think about it. But in his heart, he'd already made up his mind. "If I give him up, I lose the one thing that still means something." Even on the day of the party, there were red flags. Bruno wouldn't wear the birthday collar Bryan had made. He growled low and sharp when Bryan tried to put it on. Later, he snapped at a balloon that popped near the grill, spinning around like he'd been attacked. Guests started pulling their kids closer. A few quietly stepped inside the house, watching through the kitchen windows instead of mingling out back. Bryan tried to ease the tension with jokes. "He's just nervous. Doesn't like surprises, same as me." But Claire, standing by the cooler, whispered to her husband again, "Something's going to happen, I can feel it." And then came the moment, the final warning no one could ignore. Bryan was kneeling beside the cake table, lighting candles, when Bruno walked up behind him and placed a paw on his shoulder. It looked affectionate, but the pressure forced Bryan down to one knee. He flinched, and for the first time in front of everyone, he turned and said, not playfully, not gently, but with real fear in his voice, "Bruno, off. Get off me." The bear didn't move, until Bryan stood up and pushed him gently away. Then Bruno growled, loud enough to make the music skip. Everyone froze. Bryan laughed, thin and nervous, brushing it off with a wave. "All right, big guy, that's enough excitement." He reached out to scratch behind Bruno's ear like always, and Bruno let him. But his eyes were different now, darker, sharper, like he wasn't fully in the moment anymore. Like something inside him had cracked open, and the person he once recognized was starting to disappear. April 14th was supposed to be the happiest day Bryan Kessler had had in years. It started with sunshine, hugs from old friends, the smell of barbecue in the air, and a cake with blue and white frosting that said, "Happy 42nd, Bryan and Bruno." It was the first birthday party Bryan had thrown since his dad passed, And it was the first time he ever let Bruno out in front of so many people. Maybe that was the mistake. The moment happened just as the candles were being lit. Bryan was kneeling beside the picnic table, holding a lighter in one hand and waving off the wind with the other. Someone nearby was trying to get a good photo of him and Bruno together, smile they called out. That's when Bruno moved. Not fast, not suddenly. He just leaned forward. A gentle push with his snout, a soft grunt. But his massive paw followed next, and this time he pushed Bryan square in the chest. Hard. Bryan stumbled backward, laughing nervously. All right, down boy. But Bruno didn't stop. He moved forward again, standing up slightly on his hind legs. His claws grazed Bryan's shoulders. It almost looked like a hug if you didn't notice the way Bryan's face changed. He wasn't smiling anymore. Hey, Bruno? No, he said quietly. Not now, buddy. The crowd had gone silent. Bryan tried to step back, but his foot caught the leg of a folding chair. He fell. And when he hit the ground, something shifted in Bruno. In an instant, he dropped all 600 pounds onto Bryan's chest. People screamed. Kids cried. Someone yelled, "Call 911." Bryan gasped for air, trying to push Bruno off with shaking hands. "Bruno, stop!" he choked out. "Get off!" But it was like the bear didn't hear him. Or maybe he did, and didn't recognize the voice anymore. Bruno pinned Bryan down with one paw, then swiped with the other claws, cutting across Bryan's back. A deep, wet, tearing sound. Blood splattered onto the birthday tablecloth. Claire Davis ran forward first. "Bryan, don't move. I'm calling for help." Bryan coughed violently. "He's scared," he gasped. "He's just scared." But Bruno wasn't scared. He was gone. Gone into the part of his brain no training could reach. The part that remembered hunger, territory, power. He grabbed at Bryan's shoulder with his jaws. The sound that followed was indescribable. Bone snapping, flesh tearing, a scream so raw it made everyone flinch. Two guests tried to run forward. Both were stopped by the sight of Bruno jerking Bryan's body side to side like a toy. Someone threw a lawn chair. It bounced off Bruno's back. He didn't even look up. It lasted less than a minute. But when Bruno finally stepped away, panting, wild-eyed, fur stained red, Bryan wasn't moving. His chest had caved in. One arm was twisted beneath him, and his face was still, peaceful somehow, as if a part of him had made peace with this long before it ever happened. Maybe he always knew. Maybe part of him always feared this day would come. And maybe that's why he never locked the gate. When the sheriff's deputies arrived, Bruno was pacing near the back of the yard, blood still dripping from his chin. He didn't charge them, didn't roar. He just sat, calm, still, like nothing had happened at all. He was shot twice in the chest. The crowd stayed for hours silent, trembling in disbelief. No one could speak. A few cried. Claire sat on the porch with blood on her jeans, staring into space, whispering, He told me this would never happen. But it did. And no one could make sense of it, because Bryan loved that bear more than anything. And the bear loved him too, in his own way. But love, as the world was reminded that day, isn't always enough to change what nature put in motion. By the time the sun set that day, the backyard was empty. The paper plates had blown across the lawn. The birthday banner hung crooked, flapping gently in the spring wind. A single cupcake still sat on the table, its candle never lit. Bryan Kessler was gone. Bruno was gone too. And Eagle Ridge would never forget what it witnessed. In the hours after the attack, first responders worked in quiet coordination. No sirens, no media circus, just a few deputies, an animal control officer, and a coroner who had known Bryan since high school. No one said the word mauled. No one had to. The blood on the grass said enough. News spread fast. By Monday morning, Bryan's story was on every local outlet, and by that afternoon, it was trending nationwide. Colorado man killed by his pet Grizzly on birthday internet star dies in tragic animal attack. He was family to me, man's love for bear ends in fatal turn. The internet, once captivated by their bond, now turned to debate. Some blamed Bryan. Some blamed the bear. Others blamed a system that allowed it to happen at all. In one viral tweet, someone wrote, "We all watched it happen for 3 years, and now we're surprised." Another user posted an old video of Bryan singing to Bruno with the caption, "This isn't cute. This was always a ticking time bomb." But others pushed back. He loved that bear more than people love their own kids. He died doing what he believed in. Bruno wasn't a monster. He was a bear. That's all. At the funeral held 5 days later, in the small wooden chapel on Main Street, there was barely a dry eye in the room. Claire Davis spoke first. Bryan didn't live in fear. He lived in hope. He believed in the kind of bond most of us only dream about. And yeah, maybe he went too far, but none of us can say he didn't love with everything he had. Bryan's ashes were spread in the woods behind his home, the same woods where he had first found Bruno as a trembling, abandoned cub. The spot is marked now by a wooden carving, a man and a bear sitting side by side. No chains, no fences, just stillness. Weeks passed, then months. The internet moved on, the hashtags faded. But for the people who knew Bryan, the silence left behind was deafening. His house was eventually boarded up. The yard grew wild, and every so often someone driving by would slow down just to look, as if expecting to see them again, as if the bear might still be sitting there waiting for Bryan to come home. And so here we are at the end of a story that started with hope, grew with love, and ended in silence. Was Bryan wrong? Was he naive, reckless, blinded by emotion? Or was he brave enough to believe in something most people wouldn't even try to understand? One thing's for sure, he didn't just see an animal when he looked at Bruno. He saw family. But here's the question we leave with you. Can love truly override instinct? Can we ever really tame the wild? Or are we just pretending it listens to us? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Would you have taken the risk Bryan did? Do you believe animals like Bruno can truly love us back? Or are we just projecting our own hearts onto creatures we'll never fully understand? If you've made it this far, thank you for being part of this emotional journey. Don't forget to subscribe to Animal Story for more real, unforgettable stories that make you feel question and remember. Because sometimes the stories we need most are the ones that leave us shaken.